The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds in harsh streaks, highlighting the dust motes dancing above yesterday's dishes. I stood at the counter, gripping the granite edge with both hands, trying to steady myself as another wave of dizziness washed over me. The digital clock on the microwave glowed 7:23 a.m. Jake needed to leave for school in 20 minutes, and I still hadn't finished packing his lunch. My hands trembled as I spread peanut butter across wheat bread, the simple motion requiring more concentration than it should have. The shakiness had started 3 days ago. Subtle at first, easy to blame on too much coffee or not enough sleep. But today felt different. Today my vision kept blurring at the edges, and there was this gnawing emptiness in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. "Jake!" I called toward the stairs, my voice coming out weaker than intended. "Can you come help me for a minute?" The thundering of teenage feet on hardwood announced his arrival before he appeared in the doorway, his dark hair still messy from sleep, backpack slung over one shoulder. At 17, Jake had inherited his father's height and stubborn streak, though thankfully not his tendency to disappear when things got difficult. "What now, Mom?" He glanced at his phone screen, already impatient. "I've got exactly 12 minutes before I have to meet Dylan at the bus stop." I gestured weakly at the lunch assembly line spread across the counter sandwich ingredients. An apple that needed slicing, chips that needed portioning into a container. "I'm feeling a little off this morning. Could you just help me finish? Seriously." Jake's shoulders sagged with the dramatic weight only teenagers can muster. "You always overreact about everything. You probably just need more coffee or something." He grabbed a granola bar from the pantry and shoved it in his backpack. "I'll just buy lunch today." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they carried the dismissive tone I'd heard from his father so many times before the divorce. That same voice that had told me I was making a big deal out of nothing when I'd wanted to discuss our marriage problems, our financial stress, our complete inability to communicate. "Jake, please," I tried again, hating how small my voice sounded. "I really don't feel." But he was already grabbing his jacket from the chair, phone buzzing with what I assumed was a text from Dylan. "Mom, you say this stuff all the time. Remember last month when you thought you were having a heart attack and it turned out you just had heartburn from Dad's old chili recipe?" He wasn't wrong. I had rushed to urgent care that night, convinced something was seriously wrong, only to leave with a recommendation for antacids and a copay I couldn't really afford. But this felt different. This felt like my body was slowly disconnecting from my brain, like I was operating a machine I no longer understood. "I'll see you tonight," Jake called over his shoulder, already heading for the front door. "And Mom, maybe call Amy if you're really worried. She always knows what to do." The door slammed with a finality that seemed to echo through the empty house. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the debris of a morning routine I couldn't complete, listening to the silence that followed his departure. Outside, I could hear the distant rumble of the school bus, carrying my son away from whatever was happening to me. Amy, my older daughter, 22 and thriving in her marketing job 3 states away in Denver. Jake was right. Amy always did know what to do. She'd inherited my organizational skills, but not my tendency to ignore my own needs. Even as a child, she'd been the one to remember everyone's birthdays, to notice when I was pushing myself too hard, to gently suggest I sit down and rest. But Amy was building her life, finally independent after years of helping me hold our family together through the divorce. The last thing I wanted was to burden her with another one of my episodes, as Jake had started calling them. I managed to clean up the lunch mess, moving slowly and deliberately, taking breaks when the room started to spin. The familiar rhythm of domestic tasks usually grounded me, loading the dishwasher, wiping down counters, organizing the clutter that accumulated despite my best efforts. But today, each movement felt monumental. By 8:15, I should have been getting ready for work. Margaret's department store expected me at 9 a.m. sharp, and as the floor manager, I needed to be there early to prepare for our weekly inventory shipment. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and provided health insurance benefits I couldn't afford to lose as a single mother. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, gripping the handrail tighter than usual. In the mirror above my dresser, I caught sight of myself and paused. When had I gotten so pale? The woman looking back at me seemed somehow smaller than I remembered, her brown eyes hollowed with fatigue I'd been carrying for months. The shower helped, the hot water washing away some of the morning's shakiness. I told myself Jake was probably right. I was overreacting, letting stress manifest as physical symptoms. It wouldn't be the first time. The divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, but the emotional aftermath still surfaced in unexpected ways. I chose my outfit carefully, a navy blouse and black slacks that projected competence and control. In retail, appearance mattered, especially when you were managing a team of younger employees who sometimes questioned whether a middle-aged, divorced woman really knew what she was talking about. The drive to work usually took 25 minutes through suburban Columbus traffic, past strip malls and chain restaurants that had become as familiar as my own neighborhood. But today, I found myself having to pull over twice, once because the traffic lights seemed unusually bright, and once because I couldn't remember if I'd actually stopped at the last intersection. Margaret's department store sat in a shopping complex that had seen better days, anchored by a grocery store on one end and a struggling bookstore on the other. I'd worked there for 4 years, starting as a sales associate just after the divorce when I needed steady income and flexible hours that worked around Jake's school schedule. "Morning, Linda," called Jessica, one of our newest hires, as I walked through the employee entrance. At 19, she reminded me of Amy at that age, eager, optimistic, still believing that hard work guaranteed success. "Morning," I managed, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other as I made my way to the office. The fluorescent lights seemed particularly harsh today, creating a sterile brightness that made everything look slightly unreal. The morning passed in a blur of routine tasks, checking yesterday's sales reports, reviewing the schedule for next week, dealing with a customer complaint about a return policy. But underneath the familiar rhythm of work, I could feel something shifting in my body, like gears that weren't quite meshing properly. Around 11:30, during a brief lull between customers, the shakiness returned with a vengeance. I was standing near the jewelry counter, discussing display arrangements with Jessica, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. "Mrs. Linda?" Jessica's voice sounded far away, though she was standing right next to me. "Are you okay?" I gripped the counter edge, the same way I'd gripped my kitchen counter that morning, trying to anchor myself to something solid. But this time the dizziness was accompanied by a cold sweat that seemed to start from somewhere deep inside my chest and spread outward. "I think I need to sit down," I whispered, but the words came out jumbled, like my tongue wasn't working properly. The last thing I clearly remembered was Jessica's frightened face as she reached for the phone to call 911, and the strange thought that Jake had been wrong. This wasn't overreacting at all. The first thing I became aware of was the beeping. Steady, rhythmic, insistent like an alarm clock that wouldn't shut off. Then came the smell, that unmistakable combination of disinfectant and something vaguely medicinal that could only mean one thing: hospital. I tried to open my eyes, but the effort felt enormous, like lifting weights I wasn't strong enough to handle. When I finally managed it, harsh fluorescent light flooded my vision, and I immediately squeezed them shut again. "Mom." A voice I recognized, though it sounded strained and unfamiliar. "Mom, can you hear me?" Jake, my 17-year-old son, was somewhere in this sterile room, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before: fear. Real, undiluted fear. I forced my eyes open again, more slowly this time, and gradually the room came into focus. White walls, a TV mounted in the corner showing some daytime talk show with the sound off, and beside my bed, Jake sitting in one of those uncomfortable hospital chairs that seemed designed to prevent anyone from getting comfortable. He looked smaller somehow, younger than his 17 years, wearing the same t-shirt and jeans he'd had on that morning when he dismissed my concerns and rushed off to catch the school bus. But his face had changed. The casual confidence of adolescence had been replaced by something much more fragile. "Hey," I managed to whisper, my throat feeling like sandpaper. His face crumpled with relief. "Oh God, Mom, you scared the hell out of me." He leaned forward, reaching for my hand, then stopped halfway as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch me. "The school called and said you were in the hospital, and I thought," his voice broke slightly, "I thought maybe you were going to die." "I'm okay," I started to say, but a woman in scrubs appeared beside my bed, checking something on the machine that was making all the beeping noises. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said with a professional smile. "I'm Nurse Patricia. How are you feeling?" "Confused," I admitted. "What happened?" "You had a severe hypoglycemic episode," she explained, adjusting something on my foreline. "Your blood sugar dropped to dangerously low levels. You collapsed at work, and your co-worker called an ambulance." The words hit me like pieces of a puzzle I should have seen coming. The shakiness, the dizziness, the inability to concentrate, all classic signs of low blood sugar. Signs I'd been ignoring for weeks, maybe months, telling myself I was just stressed or tired or overreacting. "But I don't have diabetes," I said weakly. Nurse Patricia exchanged a glance with Jake that seemed to communicate something I wasn't part of. "Actually, Mrs. Rodriguez, that's something you'll need to discuss with Dr. Williams. He should be in shortly." After she left, Jake and I sat in the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. He kept looking at me like he was trying to memorize my face, as if he was afraid I might disappear if he looked away. "Jake," I started, but he cut me off. "Mom, I'm so sorry." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back since he got here. "When you asked for help this morning, and I said you were overreacting, God, I feel like such an ass. You didn't know, but I should have listened." He was crying now, tears streaming down his face in a way I hadn't seen since he was little. "You've been trying to tell me something was wrong for weeks, and I just kept blowing you off because I was too selfish to pay attention. I wanted to reach for him, to comfort him the way I had when he was small and the world seemed too big and scary. But moving still felt like an enormous effort, and besides, part of me wasn't sure I deserved to comfort him when I'd been so careless with my own health. "Have you called Amy?" I asked instead. "She's on her way." Jake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I called her from school, and she immediately booked a flight. She should be here by tonight." The thought of Amy dropping everything to fly across the country made my chest tight with guilt. She'd worked so hard to build her independence, to create a life that wasn't centered around managing our family's various crises. And here I was, pulling her back into the chaos she'd worked so hard to escape. "You didn't need to worry her." "Mom, stop." Jake's voice was firmer now, carrying an authority I wasn't used to hearing from him. "Stop trying to protect everyone from everything. You collapsed at work. You're in the hospital. Amy needed to know." Before I could respond, there was a soft knock on the door, and a middle-aged man in a white coat entered. Dr. Williams, according to his name tag, looked like someone's father-kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of gentle demeanor that probably made delivering difficult news a little easier. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Dr. Williams. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admitted. He smiled. "That's not uncommon after what you experienced. Jake, would you like to stay while we talk, or would you prefer some privacy?" I looked at my son, who was gripping the arms of his chair like he was prepared to fight anyone who tried to make him leave. "He can stay." Dr. Williams pulled up a chair and sat down, a gesture that immediately made the conversation feel less clinical. "Linda, your blood work shows that you have type 2 diabetes. Based on your hemoglobin A1C levels, I'd estimate you've had it for at least 6 months, possibly longer." The words seemed to echo in the small room. Diabetes. a chronic condition that would require daily management, medication, lifestyle changes. The kind of diagnosis that split your life into before and after. But I don't feel diabetic, I said, which even to my own ears sounded ridiculous. That's actually very common, Dr. Williams explained patiently. Type 2 diabetes can develop gradually, and many people adapt to the symptoms without realizing what's happening. The fatigue, the difficulty concentrating, the increased thirst your body learns to function with elevated blood sugar levels until something triggers a crisis. I thought about all the times over the past few months when I'd felt exhausted after a full night's sleep, when I'd attributed my constant thirst to stress or dry air, when I'd blamed my inability to focus on the normal chaos of single motherhood. What triggered it today? Jake asked quietly. Probably a combination of factors, the doctor said. Skipping breakfast, stress, not eating regularly. When you're diabetic, your body can't regulate blood sugar the way it should. What felt like a normal morning to you was actually putting significant strain on your system. I remembered standing in the kitchen that morning, too dizzy to finish making Jake's lunch, asking for help and being told I was overreacting. The irony was almost too much to bear. What happens now? I asked. We'll keep you overnight for observation. Make sure your blood sugar stabilizes. Tomorrow, we'll discuss medication options and connect you with a diabetes education program. This is very manageable, Linda, but it will require some significant lifestyle changes. After Dr. Williams left, Jake and I sat in the gathering afternoon light, both of us processing what we'd just learned. The TV continued its silent chatter in the corner, and somewhere down the hall, I could hear the familiar sounds of hospital life phones ringing, carts rolling, the soft conversations of people dealing with their own crises. I should have listened to you, Jake said again, his voice small. And I should have listened to my body, I replied. We both made mistakes. He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw not the sullen teenager who'd rushed out of the house that morning, but the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, certain that I could protect him from anything scary in the world. Are you going to be okay? He asked. I thought about the question seriously. Was I going to be okay? Physically, probably. Dr. Williams seemed confident that with proper management, I could live a normal, healthy life. But emotionally, the diagnosis felt like a seismic shift, a reminder that I wasn't invincible, that my body had limits I'd been ignoring for too long. I think so, I said finally, but things are going to have to change. Jake nodded, and in that gesture, I saw something I hadn't expected: maturity. Real, adult understanding of the fact that life sometimes demands more than we think we can give. I want to help, he said. I mean it this time. Not just because I feel guilty, but because he paused, searching for words. Because you've been taking care of everyone else for so long, and maybe it's time someone took care of you. Outside my hospital room window, the sun was beginning to set over Columbus, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, Amy was on a plane, worried and probably feeling guilty about living so far away. Somewhere else, life was continuing its normal rhythm: people making dinner, helping kids with homework, dealing with the ordinary challenges that had seemed so overwhelming just 12 hours ago. But in this room, something fundamental had shifted. The crisis that had started with a collapsed mother in a department store had become something else entirely: an opportunity for honesty, for change, for the kind of authentic connection that only seems possible when we stop pretending we have everything under control. Jake reached for my hand then, and this time he didn't hesitate. The smell of Amy's lavender perfume reached me before I saw her face. I'd been dozing fitfully in the hospital bed, waking every few minutes to the unfamiliar sounds of monitoring equipment and hallway conversations, when suddenly my older daughter was there, still wearing her business clothes from the flight, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from travel. "Mom," she breathed, setting down a small suitcase and immediately coming to my bedside. At 22, Amy had always been the organizer, the problem solver, the one who could walk into chaos and somehow create order. But now she looked younger than her years, her dark eyes wide with the same fear I'd seen in Jake's face the day before. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, reaching for her hand. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Of course I did." She squeezed my fingers, and I could feel the slight tremor in her grip. "Jake called me from school yesterday, crying so hard I could barely understand him. He kept saying you collapsed, and it was his fault." I glanced over at Jake, who was curled up in the corner chair where he'd spent the night despite the nurse's suggestions that he go home. He'd refused to leave, as if maintaining a vigil could somehow undo his dismissive words from yesterday morning. "It wasn't his fault," I said firmly, making sure both my children could hear me. "This has been building for months. I just didn't want to see it." Amy pulled up another chair, and suddenly my small hospital room felt crowded with the weight of our family history, all the times I downplayed my own needs. All the occasions when I'd insisted I was fine when I clearly wasn't, all the moments when my children had learned to expect me to be the strong one, the reliable one, the one who never needed help. "Dr. Williams explained the diabetes," Amy said, her voice taking on the professional tone she used at work when discussing project timelines and deliverables. "I've been researching management strategies and dietary changes. We need to talk about medication schedules and blood glucose monitoring." "Amy," I interrupted gently, "you just got here. You don't need to fix everything right now." She looked startled, as if the idea of not immediately jumping into solution mode hadn't occurred to her. "But Mom, this is serious. You could have died yesterday." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with the implications none of us wanted to fully examine. I could have died, not from anything dramatic or sudden, but from the slow, steady neglect of my own basic needs, the kind of self-destruction that happens so gradually you don't notice until it's almost too late. "I know it's serious," I said quietly. "And yes, I need to make changes. But the first change I need to make is learning how to accept help instead of always trying to manage everything alone." Jake shifted in his chair, and I could see him processing this idea, the possibility that his mother might not always have all the answers, might sometimes need the kind of support she'd always provided for him. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical consultations and discharge preparations. Dr. Williams returned with a diabetes educator named Carol, a woman in her 50s who managed to be both reassuring and realistic about what lay ahead. "The good news," Carol explained as she demonstrated how to use a blood glucose monitor, "is that type 2 diabetes is very manageable with the right approach. The challenging news is that it requires daily attention and some significant lifestyle modifications." She walked us through the basics, checking blood sugar levels before meals and at bedtime, understanding how different foods affected glucose levels, recognizing the warning signs of both high and low blood sugar episodes. "The most important thing," Carol emphasized, looking directly at me, "is consistency. This isn't something you can manage when you remember or when it's convenient. It has to become part of your daily routine." I nodded, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she was describing. For someone who had spent years juggling work schedules, parenting responsibilities, and household management while telling herself she could handle anything, the idea of adding another layer of daily monitoring felt overwhelming. "Will help," Amy said immediately. "I can set up a medication reminder system, and Jake can." "Actually," I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice, "I need to figure out how to do this myself first. You both have your own lives to manage." Amy looked hurt. "Mom, I want to help. That's what families do." "I know you do, sweetheart, and I'm grateful. But part of how I ended up here is that I've been so focused on taking care of everyone else that I forgot how to take care of myself. I need to learn how to do that before I can accept help from you." It was a revelation that felt both terrifying and liberating. For years, my identity had been built around being the capable one, the mother who could handle whatever life threw at our family. The divorce, Jake's teenage rebellions, Amy's college expenses, work stress, I'd absorb it all and kept moving forward, telling myself that my own needs could wait until everything else was stable. But everything else was never stable. There was always another crisis, another deadline, another person who needed something from me. And in the meantime, my body had been sending increasingly urgent messages that I'd learned to ignore. The discharge process took most of the afternoon. I was prescribed metformin to help regulate my blood sugar, given a glucose monitoring kit, and scheduled for follow-up appointments with both Dr. Williams and an endocrinologist. Carol provided a thick folder of educational materials about diabetes management, meal planning, and exercise recommendations. "It's a lot to absorb," she acknowledged as she walked us to the hospital exit. "Don't try to implement everything at once. Start with the basics, checking your blood sugar, taking your medication consistently, and eating regular meals. The rest will come." The ride home felt strange. Jake drove something that would have terrified me a week ago, but now seemed like a perfectly reasonable adaptation to our new reality. Amy sat in the passenger seat, periodically checking her phone and making notes about pharmacy stops and grocery shopping lists. Our house looked exactly the same as when I'd left for work 2 days earlier, but everything felt different. The kitchen where I'd collapsed seemed both familiar and foreign, like a place I remembered from a dream. "I cleaned up," Jake said quietly as we walked through the front door, "and I picked up your prescription from CVS." I looked around and realized he'd done more than clean up. The dishes were washed and put away, the counters wiped down, the clutter that usually accumulated on the kitchen table organized into neat piles. It wasn't perfect. Jake's version of organization would never match Amy's systematic approach, but it represented something I'd never seen from him before: unprompted responsibility. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Amy immediately started unpacking the educational materials, spreading pamphlets and medication schedules across the dining room table with the efficiency of someone planning a military campaign. "I can stay through the weekend," she announced. "That'll give us time to establish routines and make sure you're comfortable with the monitoring process." I watched my daughter, this capable, caring young woman who'd inherited my tendency to take charge of difficult situations, and felt a complex mix of pride and concern. Amy had worked so hard to build her independence, to create a life in Denver that wasn't centered around managing our family's problems. The last thing I wanted was for my health crisis to pull her back into the caretaker role she'd occupied throughout my divorce. "Amy, I appreciate that more than you know," I said carefully. "But I don't want you to put your life on hold because of this. You have work, your apartment, your own responsibilities." She looked up from the pamphlets, her expression a mixture of frustration and confusion. "Mom, you're more important than work. This is what family does. We take care of each other." "Yes, but not at the expense of your own well-being," I replied. "I've spent the last 2 years watching you build something amazing in Denver. I won't be the reason you give that up." Jake, who had been quietly observing this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "What if we figured out a way to do this together, without Amy having to move back or anything, but still actually helping?" Both Amy and I turned to look at him, and I saw something in his face I hadn't noticed before, not just the guilt and fear that had dominated his expression since yesterday, but genuine thoughtfulness. "What do you mean?" Amy asked. Jake shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to being the one proposing solutions to family problems. "Well, I live here. I could help with the daily stuff, making sure Mom checks her blood sugar, helping with meal planning, whatever. And you could check in from Denver, maybe visit more often, but not have to give up your job." He paused, looking directly at me. "And Mom, you could actually let us help instead of pretending you don't need anything from anybody." The words stung because they were true. How many times had I waved off offers of assistance, insisting I could handle everything myself? How many opportunities for genuine connection had I missed because I was too proud or too afraid to admit I wasn't invincible? "You're right," I said quietly. "All of you. I haven't been very good at asking for help." Amy reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, we want to help. We've always wanted to help. But you made it seem like needing help was some kind of failure." I thought about the messages I'd unconsciously sent to my children about strength and independence and self-reliance. In trying to model resilience, had I actually taught them that vulnerability was weakness? Maybe, I said slowly, we could all learn something new here. I could learn how to ask for help when I need it, and you too could learn that taking care of me doesn't mean sacrificing your own lives. Jake nodded enthusiastically. I could start by actually paying attention when you say something's wrong, instead of assuming you're being dramatic. And I could visit more often without turning every visit into a crisis management session, Amy added. As the afternoon faded into evening, we began the practical work of integrating diabetes management into our daily routine. Amy helped me organize medications and testing supplies, while Jake researched diabetic-friendly recipes on his laptop. It wasn't the dramatic transformation that part of me had expected, but rather a series of small, concrete steps toward a more sustainable way of living. For dinner, we prepared a simple meal of grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, and brown rice foods that Carol had recommended for stable blood sugar management. Jake insisted on checking my glucose levels before we ate, reading the numbers aloud from the monitor with the same intensity he usually reserved for video game statistics. 112, he announced. Carol said that's good, right? That's very good, I confirmed, feeling a strange sense of accomplishment at this small victory of self-care. As we sat around the dinner table, something we hadn't done consistently in months, I realized that the crisis that had started with my collapse in the department store had created something unexpected, an opportunity for authentic connection. Not the superficial check-ins we'd fallen into over the past few years, but real conversation about fears and needs and the complicated work of taking care of each other. Mom, Amy said as we cleared the dishes, I know you want to do this on your own, and I respect that, but can you promise me something? What's that? If you're feeling overwhelmed, or if something doesn't seem right, will you actually tell us? Not after you've tried to handle it yourself, but when you first notice something's wrong. I thought about yesterday morning, about the warning signs I'd ignored, about my reluctance to burden my children with my concerns. The old me would have made vague promises about being more careful while privately planning to handle future problems independently. But the old me had collapsed in a department store. I promise, I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it completely. 3 months later, I stood in the same kitchen where everything had changed, watching Jake measure out portions of fresh berries for our morning smoothies. It was 6:45 a.m. on a Saturday, and my 17-year-old son was voluntarily awake, helping me prepare a breakfast that would keep my blood sugar stable throughout the morning. Mom, your numbers yesterday were really good, he said, checking the glucose log we kept on the refrigerator. Dr. Williams is going to be impressed at your appointment next week. I smiled, testing my blood sugar with the practiced efficiency that had become second nature over the past few months. 108, well within the target range that no longer felt like an impossible standard to maintain. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or sudden. There was no moment of revelation where everything suddenly became easy. Instead, it had been a gradual process of building new habits, learning to recognize my body signals, and perhaps most importantly accepting that managing my health was not something I had to do alone. Jake had surprised me the most. The sullen teenager who had dismissed my concerns that morning in March had evolved into someone I barely recognized, still 17, still occasionally moody and distracted, but also genuinely invested in my well-being in a way that felt adult and responsible. Dylan's mom asked me about the diabetes stuff yesterday, he said, adding protein powder to the blender. Her dad was just diagnosed, and she wanted to know how we figured out the meal planning thing. What did you tell her? That it's actually not that complicated once you get used to it, Jake replied, and I marveled at how matter-of-fact he sounded. I mean, we just had to learn about carbs and timing and stuff, and that it helps to have the whole family doing it together. That had been one of the unexpected benefits of my diagnosis, the way it had brought our family together around shared goals and routines. Amy visited from Denver once a month now, timing her trips around my endocrinologist appointments so she could come along and ask the detailed questions that Jake and I sometimes forgot to ask. During her visits, we'd experiment with new recipes, update my medication tracking system, and simply spend time together in ways we hadn't managed since before the divorce. The phone rang as Jake was pouring smoothies into travel cups, mine for work, his for whatever Saturday adventure he had planned with his friends. "It's Amy," he said, glancing at the caller ID. I answered, putting the call on speaker so Jake could participate. This had become our routine Saturday morning check-ins, where Amy could catch up on the week's developments and we could coordinate any concerns or celebrations. "Morning, you too." Amy's voice filled the kitchen, warm and familiar despite the distance. "How's everyone feeling today?" "Good," I said automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, I'm a little nervous about the department picnic this afternoon. It's the first big work event since I was diagnosed, and I'm worried about managing my eating schedule around all the potluck food." This kind of honesty, admitting uncertainty instead of insisting everything was fine, still felt foreign to me. But over the past 3 months, I'd learned that sharing my concerns actually made them more manageable, not more overwhelming. "Did you pack snacks?" Amy asked. "And your glucose monitor?" "Already in my purse," Jake interjected. "I helped her pack everything last night." "Perfect. And Mom, remember what Carol said about social eating. You don't have to try everything, and you don't owe anyone an explanation about your food choices." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. These conversations with Amy had become a lifeline, not because she solved my problems for me, but because she reminded me of strategies I'd learned and gave me permission to prioritize my health even in social situations. "How's work going this week?" I asked, deliberately shifting the focus to Amy's life in Denver. "Really good, actually. I got assigned to lead the campaign for that sustainable clothing brand I mentioned last month. It's exactly the kind of project I was hoping for." The pride in her voice made my chest tight with emotion, not the guilty worry I used to feel about Amy's independence, but genuine happiness for her success. Learning to support my children's achievements without feeling like I was failing them had been one of the unexpected gifts of this whole experience. After we hung up, Jake and I finished our morning routine medications taken, blood sugar recorded, breakfast consumed at a pace that allowed my body to process the carbohydrates effectively. These rituals had initially felt cumbersome and medical, but they'd gradually become as natural as brushing teeth or checking the weather. "I'm meeting Dylan and some friends at the mall," Jake said, grabbing his backpack. "We'll probably get lunch at the food court. I'll text you if I'm going to be later than 6, okay?" The casual way he offered this information, where he'd be when he'd return, how to reach him, represented another small but significant change in our family dynamic. Not because I demanded more communication, but because he'd begun to understand that keeping me informed wasn't about control. It was about care. "Have fun," I said, meaning it. "And thank you for helping with breakfast." He paused at the kitchen doorway, looking back with an expression I was still getting used to, genuine affection mixed with what looked like respect. "Mom, you know you don't have to thank me for this stuff, right? It's not like I'm doing you some huge favor. You're my mom." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, looking through the mail and enjoying the rare luxury of a quiet Saturday morning. The department store picnic wasn't until 2 p.m., which gave me time to prepare both practically and mentally for the social challenges of managing my condition in public. The truth was, I'd been dreading this event for weeks, not because I was ashamed of having diabetes, but because it represented a test of everything I'd learned about advocating for my own needs in situations where it would be easier to just go along with whatever everyone else was doing. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, the young coworker who'd called 911 the day I collapsed. "Looking forward to seeing you this afternoon. I made that quinoa salad you mentioned, the one with the vegetables and lemon dressing." Jessica had become an unexpected ally in my return to work. In the weeks following my hospitalization, She'd quietly made sure I took regular breaks, offered to cover for me during particularly stressful periods, and asked thoughtful questions about diabetes management that helped normalize the daily realities of my condition. I texted back, "That sounds perfect. Thank you for thinking of me." The department store picnic was held every June in Schiller Park, a sprawling green space near downtown Columbus that could accommodate our store's 40-person staff along with their families. In previous years, I'd approached these events with a mixture of social obligation and genuine enjoyment. They were opportunities to connect with co-workers outside the retail environment, to meet spouses and children, to feel part of something larger than our daily transactions with customers. But this year felt different. This year, I was acutely aware of being the manager who'd collapsed at work, the middle-aged woman whose body had betrayed her in front of younger employees who still believed in their own invincibility. I arrived at the park carrying a large bowl of cucumber salad, a dish I'd never made before March, but had become one of my reliable contributions to potluck events. Light, refreshing, diabetes-friendly, and popular enough that I never had to worry about taking leftovers home. "Linda!" called Margaret, the store owner, waving from a picnic table loaded with covered dishes. At 65, Margaret had built her business from a single location to 3 stores across the Columbus area, and she managed to be both demanding and genuinely caring toward her employees. "How are you feeling?" she asked as I approached, her voice carrying the particular tone people used when they wanted to be supportive but weren't sure how much detail they should request. "Really good," I said, and realized I meant it. "The medication is working well, and I've learned a lot about managing everything." Margaret nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear it, and I hope you know that your job was never in question. What happened could happen to anyone." This reassurance that my health crisis hadn't jeopardized my employment had been a constant worry in the weeks following my diagnosis. As a single mother dependent on my income and health insurance, the fear of being seen as unreliable or high maintenance had sometimes felt more overwhelming than the medical challenges themselves. The afternoon unfolded with the familiar rhythms of a work picnic, volleyball games, conversations about summer vacation plans, children running between picnic tables while adults tried to maintain supervision from lawn chairs. But I found myself navigating it all with a new kind of awareness, checking my watch to monitor meal timing, choosing foods based on their likely impact on my blood sugar, excusing myself periodically to test my glucose levels in the privacy of the park's restroom. None of it felt burdensome, exactly, but it required a level of self-advocacy I was still learning to embrace. When our administrative assistant brought out elaborate chocolate cake to celebrate summer birthdays, I took a small slice and ate half of it, ignoring the voice in my head that had always insisted I finish everything on my plate to avoid seeming wasteful or ungrateful. "Smart portion control," said David, one of our sales associates, sitting down beside me with his own modest slice of cake. "My wife has been trying to get me to eat like that for years." I smiled, appreciating that he'd framed my choice as wisdom rather than limitation. These small moments of normalcy conversations that acknowledged my condition without making it the central focus had been crucial to my emotional adjustment over the past few months. Around 4 p.m., as the picnic was beginning to wind down, my phone rang. Amy's number. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, stepping away from the volleyball game to take the call. "Hey, Mom, how's the picnic going?" Amy's voice carried the slightly distracted quality that meant she was multitasking, probably organizing her apartment while we talked. "Really well, actually. Better than I expected." "I'm proud of you for going," she said. "I know you were nervous about the social eating thing. It turned out to be fine. Jessica made a diabetes-friendly salad, and I brought that cucumber dish you helped me find. Plus, I've been testing regularly, and my numbers have been stable all afternoon." "That's fantastic. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. My company is sending me to a conference in Chicago next month, and I was thinking I could extend the trip and drive down to Columbus for the weekend. Would you like that?" The offer filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the June sunshine. Amy's visits had become something I looked forward to without the guilt and anxiety that used to accompany her presence in our home. Instead of feeling like I was pulling her away from her real life, I'd learned to see these trips as genuine opportunities for connection. I would love that, I said. Jake will be thrilled, too. Great. And Mom? I'm really proud of how you're handling everything. I know it hasn't been easy. After we hung up, I rejoined the picnic cleanup, helping to pack leftover food and fold tables with the easy camaraderie that had always been one of the best parts of working retail. But underneath the familiar social rhythms, I was aware of something fundamental that had shifted over the past 3 months. The crisis that had started with my collapse in the jewelry department had forced me to confront the unsustainable way I'd been living, the constant prioritization of everyone else's needs over my own. The belief that asking for help was a sign of weakness. The assumption that my body could indefinitely absorb stress without consequences. But the recovery had taught me something even more valuable. That vulnerability could be a source of strength. That accepting help could deepen relationships rather than burden them. And that taking care of myself was not selfish, but necessary for truly caring for the people I loved. The drive home took me through neighborhoods I'd navigated for years, past the strip mall where Jake had gotten his first job, the elementary school where Amy had played soccer, the grocery store where I'd learned to read nutrition labels with the intensity of someone whose life literally depended on understanding carbohydrate counts. Everything looked the same, but I felt fundamentally different. Not because I'd overcome some dramatic challenge, but because I'd learned to live differently within the same circumstances that had once overwhelmed me. Jake was already home when I walked through the front door, sprawled on the living room couch with his laptop, working on what looked like summer school assignments. "How was the picnic?" he asked without looking up from his screen. "Good," I said, settling into the armchair across from him. "Really good, actually. How was your day?" "Fine." Dylan's dad asked me more questions about the diabetes stuff. I think they're still figuring everything out. I smiled at the casual way Jake had become something of an expert on diabetes management, able to offer advice to other families navigating similar challenges. It represented a maturity I hadn't expected from him at 17, but also a natural evolution of the empathy he'd always possessed beneath his teenage self-absorption. "Are you hungry for dinner?" I asked, checking my watch. I should probably eat something soon. "I already started rice in the rice cooker," Jake said, still focused on his laptop. "And there's leftover chicken from yesterday we can heat up. Oh, and Amy called while you were out. She said she's definitely coming next month for that extended visit." The matter-of-fact way he reported this information, meal planning, family coordination, emotional support struck me as the clearest evidence of how much our relationships had deepened over the past few months. Not through any grand gestures or dramatic conversations, but through the daily work of caring for each other in practical, sustainable ways. As evenings settled over our neighborhood, Jake and I prepared dinner together with the efficient choreography we'd developed since March. He handled the tasks that required standing and moving, heating leftovers, setting the table, filling water glasses, while I managed the diabetes-specific preparations, testing my blood sugar, calculating approximate carbohydrate content, taking my medication at the optimal time before eating. "Mom," Jake said as we sat down to eat, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? I mean, not the diabetes, obviously, but do you ever wish you hadn't had to learn all this stuff about taking care of yourself?" It was a surprisingly profound question from someone who usually avoided philosophical discussions. I considered it seriously, thinking about the way my life had changed since that morning when I'd collapsed in the kitchen. "No," I said finally. "I mean, I wish I hadn't waited until I was in crisis to start paying attention to my health. But learning to take care of myself, learning to ask for help when I need it, learning to let you and Amy actually support me, I don't regret any of that." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "It's weird, but I feel like I know you better now. As a person, not just as my mom." His words hit me with unexpected emotion. In trying so hard to be the perfect mother, capable, strong, always available to solve problems, I had somehow hidden my authentic self from my own children. The crisis that had forced me to admit my limitations had also allowed them to see me as fully human. I feel like I know you better too, I told him. And not just because you've been helping with my medical stuff, but because you've shown me who you are when people really need you. We finished dinner as the sun set behind our neighborhood's tree-lined streets, talking about Jake's summer plans and Amy's upcoming promotion, and the small details of our daily lives that had somehow become more significant since we'd learned to pay attention to them. Later, as I recorded my evening blood glucose reading in the log we kept on the kitchen counter, I realized that the number itself, 106, while within my target range, was less important than what it represented. Evidence of a life lived with intention, awareness, and the support of people who cared enough to help me maintain it. The story that had begun with a dismissive, "you always overreact," and a collapse in a department store had evolved into something I could never have predicted. A deeper understanding of what it meant to be genuinely strong, authentically vulnerable, and truly cared for. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, work stress, parenting decisions, the ongoing daily management of a chronic condition. But tonight, sitting in my kitchen with evidence of my son's thoughtfulness in the clean dishes and organized medication supplies, waiting for my daughter's weekly check-in call, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The peace of knowing I didn't have to face any of it alone.